A single drop of crimson wine, a Merlot from a private Napa vineyard worth more than her monthly rent, was all it took to shatter Catherine Pierce's world. It wasn't just a stain on a pristine white dress. It was a brand, a mark of her station, a scarlet letter painted by the condescending sneer of a woman who believed the world was her playground. That night, under the golden chandeliers of the city's most exclusive restaurant, she was just a waitress, an invisible girl. But in the shadows, a different kind of power was watching a man who didn't see a stain, but the quiet, unbreakable dignity beneath it. This is the story of how one moment of humiliation became the catalyst for an unbelievable transformation, proving that sometimes the person you dismiss is the one who will end up owning the room you're in. The Air in Aurelia, the city's most celebrated fine dining establishment, was a carefully curated symphony of quiet sophistication. It smelled of truffle oil, old money, and the faint, crisp scent of starched linen. For Catherine Kate Pierce, it smelled of survival. Each night she navigated the labyrinth of tables, her black uniform a stark contrast to the jewel-toned silks and bespoke suits of the clientele. She moved with a practiced grace, her smile a polite, impenetrable mask that hid the exhaustion of a 12-hour shift and the lingering anxiety over her father's mounting medical bills. Tonight, Table 7 was the epicenter of the restaurant's universe. It was occupied by Bradley Vance, a brash real estate developer whose face was plastered on billboards across the city, and his girlfriend, Tiffany Sterling. Tiffany was a creature sculpted from ambition and adorned in designer labels. Tonight she wore a dress the color of fresh cream, a figure-hugging sheath of silk that probably cost more than Kate's entire art history degree. Her blonde hair was a perfect, immovable helmet, and her laughter was a high, sharp sound that sliced through the restaurant's hushed ambiance. Kate approached their table with a bottle of the 2012 Rutherford Cabernet Sauvignon, her movements fluid and economical. "Mr. Vance, your Cabernet," she murmured, her voice soft but clear. Tiffany waved a dismissive hand, her diamond bracelet catching the light and splintering it into 1,000 tiny rainbows. "Just pour it, darling. We don't need the life story of the grape." Kate's smile didn't falter. She was used to this. The casual condescension was as much a part of the uniform as the apron tied around her waist. She positioned the bottle her hand steady and began to pour the deep red liquid into Bradley's glass. It happened in a blink. A waiter carrying a heavy tray of desserts swerved to avoid a boisterous guest from another table. His elbow jostled Kate's arm just as she tilted the bottle. It was a minuscule nudge, a fractional error in the grand cosmic ballet, but its consequence was catastrophic. A single perfect stream of crimson wine arced through the air, landing directly on the pristine cream silk of Tiffany Sterling's dress. For a moment, there was absolute silence. The dark red stain bloomed on the fabric like a grotesque flower just below her ribs. Tiffany looked down. Her perfectly painted lips parted in a silent gasp of horror. Then her eyes, the color of a winter sky, lifted to meet Kate's. The polite chill in them had frozen into daggers of pure ice. "You clumsy, incompetent little fool." She hissed, her voice low and venomous, yet it seemed to carry across the entire dining room. The surrounding tables fell quiet, conversations dying as patrons turned to watch the unfolding drama. "I am so incredibly sorry," Kate began, her face flushing with heat. "It was an accident." The other... An accident. Tiffany's voice rose a shrill theatrical crescendo. "This is a custom Brandon Maxwell dress. It's ruined. Do you have any idea what this costs? Of course you don't. It's probably more than you make in a year." Bradley Vance shifted uncomfortably, a dull flush creeping up his neck. "Tiff, calm down. It's just a dress. just a dress," she shrieked, turning on him. "It's not just a dress. When it's your credit card paying for it, is it, Brad? Or perhaps you think I should just wear rags like her." She gestured a perfectly manicured finger at Kate, disgust twisting her beautiful features. Kate stood frozen, the heavy wine bottle still in her hand. Her training dictated that she should apologize profusely, offer to pay for the cleaning, and debase herself until the customer was satisfied. But the sheer venom in Tiffany's tone paralyzed her. It wasn't about the dress. It was about power. It was about Tiffany reinforcing the chasm that separated their two worlds. I can get you some club soda," Kate stammered, her professional composure cracking. Tiffany laughed, a sound devoid of all humor. "Club soda? You think a splash of fizzy water is going to fix this? You should be fired. What's your name?" She squinted at Kate's name tag. "Catherine, how pathetically plain. I'm going to speak to your manager. I will make sure you're not waiting tables here or anywhere else in this city by tomorrow." The threat hung in the air, thick and suffocating. For Kate, losing this job wasn't an inconvenience, it was a catastrophe. It was the difference between paying for her father's medication and not. It was the barrier standing between her and utter financial ruin. Panic began to claw at her throat, cold and sharp. She looked around the room, her eyes pleading. She saw a sea of averted gazes of diners, suddenly fascinated by their bread baskets or the pattern on the ceiling. No one would intervene. In this world, the woman in the $1,000 dress held all the cards. The girl in the black apron was disposable. The restaurant manager, a perpetually stressed man named Mr. Dubois, hurried over his face, pale. "Ms. Sterling, is there a problem?" "A problem?" Tiffany scoffed. "Your waitress just destroyed my dress and stood there like a moron. I want her gone. Now." Mr. Dubois looked at Kate, his expression a mixture of pity and professional necessity. He knew Kate was his best waitress, reliable, hard-working, never causing trouble. But he also knew that Bradley Vance's corporate account spent tens of thousands of dollars at Aurelia every month. The math was simple and brutal. "Pierce, go to the back," he said, his voice tight. Humiliation washed over Kate in a searing wave. She placed the wine bottle on the table with a hand that trembled slightly and turned her back straight, her head held high. She could feel every eye in the restaurant on her as she walked the long, lonely path back to the kitchens. The mask was gone. All she felt was the sting of injustice and the cold dread of what was to come. As she pushed through the swinging doors into the cacophony of the kitchen, she didn't see the man sitting alone at a small, discreet table in the corner of the dining room. He had been watching the entire exchange, his face impassive. He took a slow sip of his water, his dark eyes missing nothing. Not the deliberate cruelty in Tiffany Sterling's voice, not the flicker of panic in Kate's eyes, and most certainly not the quiet, steely dignity with which she had absorbed the abuse without shedding a single tear. His name was Damian Blackwood, and unlike Bradley Vance, he didn't measure a person's worth by the label on their clothes. He measured it by their character. And Catherine Pierce had just shown more character than anyone he had seen in a very long time. Damian Blackwood preferred the corner table. It was tucked away behind a large potted ficus, offering a clear view of the dining room while rendering him almost invisible. He came to Aurelia not for the Michelin stars or the C&B scene crowd, but for the anonymity. Dressed in a simple dark sweater and grey trousers without his usual tailored suit and statement watch, he was just another patron easily overlooked. To the world, he was the enigmatic CEO of Blackwood Industries, a global conglomerate with interests in technology, shipping, and finance. He was a billionaire, a titan of industry whose decisions could shift markets. But here he was, just Mr. Black, a quiet man who enjoyed the seared scallops and the solitude. He had been nursing a glass of scotch when the commotion at table 7 began. He'd noticed the couple when they walked in, Vance preening and Loud, a man who wore his wealth like a costume, and the woman Tiffany, who radiated a brittle, demanding energy. Damien had encountered their type 1,000 times in boardrooms and at charity galas. They were empty vessels making the most noise to disguise the hollowness within. He had also noticed the waitress, Kate. He'd been a regular for 6 months, always requesting a table in her section if she was working. He appreciated her quiet efficiency, the way she anticipated a need before it was voiced, the subtle intelligence in her eyes that suggested she was seeing far more than just her customers' orders. There was a grace to her that had nothing to do with her uniform and everything to do with her composure. When the wine spilled, Damien had tensed. He saw the accident for what it was, a fluke, a moment of bad luck. But he also saw the immediate predatory gleam in Tiffany Sterling's eyes. She hadn't seen a mistake. She'd seen an opportunity. An opportunity to exert power to humiliate someone she deemed beneath her, to create a spectacle with herself at the center. He watched his jaw tight with anger as Tiffany unleashed her tirade. He heard every poisonous word, saw the way she weaponized her privilege against a young woman who was simply trying to do her job. He noted Bradley Vance's weak, ineffectual attempt to calm her, a man clearly more afraid of his girlfriend's temper than he was of behaving with basic decency. Damien's contempt for them solidified into a cold, hard stone in his gut. But it was Kate's reaction that truly held his attention. He saw the initial shock, the flush of embarrassment, the flicker of fear when her job was threatened. Any other person might have broken down, groveled, or argued. Kate did none of those things. She absorbed the blows, and though her composure trembled, it did not shatter. When she walked away, her spine was rigid, her head held high. It was a retreat, but it was not a surrender. It was the walk of someone who, despite the circumstances, refused to be broken. Damien signaled for his check. His quiet evening was over. As he paid, he discreetly asked the hostess about the waitress who had served table 7. "Oh, Kate," the young woman said, her voice full of sympathy. "That was awful what happened. Miss Sterling is demanding Mr. Dubois fire her. It's so unfair." "I agree," Damien said, his voice a low rumble. He left a tip that was more than double the cost of his meal and walked out into the cool night air. But he didn't go home. He waited, standing in the shadows of an alcove across the street, his gaze fixed on the restaurant's service entrance. An hour later, the door creaked open. Kate emerged, stripped of her uniform, now wearing jeans and a simple grey hoodie. Her shoulders were slumped, the defiant posture from the dining room, gone replaced by the heavy weight of defeat. She clutched her worn backpack to her chest like a shield. She sat on the edge of a concrete planter, pulled out her phone, and Damien could just make out the faint, trembling light on her face as she scrolled through it, her expression a mask of despair. He crossed the street, his footsteps soft on the pavement. Miss Pierce-Kate's head snapped up, her eyes wide with alarm. She didn't recognize him out of the context of the restaurant. Yes, my name is Damien. I was a patron in the restaurant tonight. I saw what happened." Her face fell, a fresh wave of humiliation washing over her. "Oh." She looked away, focusing on a crack in the sidewalk. "Well, thanks for the reminder." "I'm not here to remind you," he said, gently stopping a respectful few feet away. "I'm here to say that what that woman did was abhorrent, and the way you handled yourself was admirable." Kate looked up at him again, a flicker of surprise in her tired eyes. She had expected pity, or perhaps morbid curiosity. She hadn't expected respect. "Admirable, I got fired." The words came out with a bitter finality. "You were fired because your manager is a coward who values a large bill over a good employee." Damien stated his tone, leaving no room for argument. "That is a reflection on him, not on you." A small, sad smile touched her lips. "I appreciate you saying that, but kind words don't pay the rent." She sighed, running a hand through her simple brown ponytail. I don't know what I'm going to do. My father, he's sick. I need this job. I need the insurance." She hadn't meant to say so much, to unload her burdens onto a complete stranger, but his quiet, steady presence seemed to draw the truth from her. Damien's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes softened. "What do you want to do, Catherine, if you weren't a waitress at Aurelia? What would you be doing?" The question caught her off guard. No one had asked her that in years. The dream was something she kept locked away, a fragile treasure she only looked at in the quietest hours of the night. "It's silly," she mumbled. "Try me," he urged. She took a breath. "I have a degree in art history. My focus was on the Dutch masters, specifically the provenance of works looted during World War II. I wanted to be a curator, or work in art repatriation, helping families and institutions recover stolen pieces." She said it all in a rush, as if saying it quickly would make it sound less ridiculous, coming from a fired waitress sitting on a dirty planter. Damien remained silent for a long moment, studying her. The passion that had lit up her face when she spoke of her dream was a stark contrast to the weary resignation of moments before. This was the real Catherine Pierce. "That's not silly," he said, finally, his voice firm. "That's important." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a simple, elegant business card. It was made of thick black cardstock, with a name embossed in silver, Damien Blackwood. Below it was a single title, Chairman, the Blackwood Foundation. "I am the head of a private foundation," he said, his words measured and deliberate. "Among other things, we fund a significant arts and antiquities department. We specialize in provenance research and repatriation. It's a personal interest of mine." Kate stared at the card, her mind struggling to process the information. The Blackwood Foundation. It was one of the most prestigious philanthropic organizations in the world. Its arts department was legendary, responsible for recovering several lost masterpieces in recent years. I don't understand." She whispered, her gaze lifting from the card to his face. For the first time, she truly looked at him, and a jolt of recognition went through her. She'd seen this man's face before, in the financial pages of newspapers and magazines. Damien Blackwood, the billionaire. He had been sitting in her section, and she had never even noticed. "I believe," Damien said, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips, "that you may be in the wrong profession, Catherine. My foundation has an opening for a junior research associate. It's a demanding role. It requires intelligence, meticulous attention to detail, and a quiet strength of character. I think you might be perfect for it." He paused. "My assistant will call you tomorrow to arrange an interview. If you're interested." Kate could only stare, the black card feeling impossibly heavy in her hand. The world had tilted on its axis. One moment she was at rock bottom, humiliated and jobless. The next she was being offered a lifeline, a chance at the very dream she thought she had been forced to abandon forever. And it was all happening because of a spilled glass of wine. The next morning, Kate woke to the insistent buzzing of her phone. Her first thought was that it was Mr. Dubois calling to demand she return her uniform or to deliver some final parting insult. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she fumbled for the device on her nightstand. The number was unfamiliar with a downtown exchange she didn't recognize. Hesitantly, she answered. "Hello, good morning. Am I speaking with Catherine Pierce?" The voice on the other end was female, crisp, and impossibly professional. "Yes, this is she. My name is Genevieve Croft. I am the executive assistant to Mr. Damien Blackwood at the Blackwood Foundation. Mr. Blackwood asked me to contact you regarding an opening in our Arts and Antiquities department. He was hoping you might be available to come in for an interview this afternoon at 2 o'clock. The words were spoken with such calm certainty that Kate felt a dizzying sense of vertigo. It hadn't been a dream. The man in the dark sweater, the business card, the impossible offer, it was all real. Today. At 2, she repeated her voice, a weak echo. "Is that inconvenient?" Genevieve asked, a hint of programmed politeness in her tone. "No, not at all." "It's perfect," Kate rushed to say, sitting bolt upright in bed. 2 o'clock is perfect. Excellent. The address is 1400 Park Avenue, 50th floor. Please ask for me upon your arrival." The line clicked dead. Kate stared at the phone, her mind racing. 1400 Park Avenue, the Blackwood Tower, a gleaming spire of steel and glass that dominated the city skyline. She had spent her life seeing that building from the outside, a symbol of a world so far removed from her own, it might as well have been on another planet. And in a few hours she was expected to walk through its front doors. Panic set in a cold wave that followed the initial shock. What would she wear? Her entire wardrobe consisted of worn-out jeans, faded T-shirts, and the single, slightly too tight black blazer she'd bought for a college presentation 5 years ago. What would she say? Her knowledge of the Dutch masters felt theoretical, academic, and hopelessly inadequate in the face of the real-world prestige of the Blackwood Foundation. This had to be a mistake. Or worse, a prank. Or maybe it was some form of charity, a rich man's whim born out of pity for the poor waitress he'd seen get humiliated. The thought soured the hope that had begun to blossom in her chest. She didn't want pity. She had spent her entire life fighting against being an object of pity. She spent the next few hours in a frantic state of preparation. She ironed her old blazer until it was impossibly crisp, paired it with her only pair of black trousers, and pulled her simple brown hair into a severe professional bun. She looked at her reflection in the cracked mirror of her tiny apartment bathroom. The woman staring back looked terrified, an imposter about to play a role she hadn't rehearsed. Taking a deep breath, she grabbed the worn leather satchel that held her college thesis, a 200-page analysis of Vermeer's use of light and its influence on provenance verification. It was her armor. If this was a real opportunity, it was all she had to prove her worth. The lobby of the Blackwood Tower was designed to intimidate. The ceiling soared 3 stories high. The floors were polished black marble that reflected the light like a dark mirror, and a massive abstract sculpture dominated the center of the space. It felt less like an office building and more like a cathedral dedicated to commerce. Kate approached the monolithic security desk, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "I'm here to see Genevieve Croft," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The security guard checked his list, gave her a visitor's pass, and directed her to a private elevator bank. The ride to the 50th floor was silent and swift, her ears popping as the car ascended. When the doors slid open, she stepped into another world. This wasn't an office, it was a gallery. The walls were lined with museum-quality art, a calm, contemplative Rothko here, a striking, aggressive Pollock there. Genevieve Croft was exactly as her voice had suggested, impeccably dressed, elegantly coiffed, and radiating an aura of formidable competence. She led Kate through a hushed, open-plan office where people in tailored suits spoke in low, serious tones, and into a large corner office. The office had one wall made entirely of glass, offering a breathtaking godlike view of the city below, and sitting behind a large minimalist desk was Damien Blackwood. Today he was not the quietly dressed patron from Aurelia. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt, and no tie. The casual observer from the restaurant was gone, replaced by the man whose face she'd seen in Forbes. Power radiated from him, but it was a quiet, contained power, not the boorish, showy kind that Bradley Vance projected. "Miss Pierce." "Thank you for coming," he said, rising from his desk. He gestured to a chair opposite him. "Please have a seat." Kate sat perching on the edge of the plush leather chair. Her satchel felt heavy and foolish on her lap. "I hope my offer last night didn't seem too forward." He began, his eyes watching her closely. "It was unexpected," Kate admitted. "I don't operate on whims, Miss Pierce," he said, as if reading her mind. "Last night I saw two things. I saw a person subjected to unwarranted cruelty, and I saw that person respond with a level of poise that I rarely encounter. But that's not why you're here. You're here because you mentioned you studied the provenance of art looted during the Second World War." He leaned forward, his focus entirely on her. "My foundation is currently tracking a piece, a small, relatively unknown painting by Johannes Vermeer, titled The Girl with the Silver Lute. It was stolen from a private collection in The Hague in 1943. We have reason to believe it has recently surfaced on the black market, and that a buyer in this city is attempting to acquire it. The work is subtle. Its authenticity is difficult to verify without expert knowledge." "Tell me about Vermeer. What would you look for?" This was it. The test. All the self-doubt, all the fear evaporated, replaced by the familiar thrill of academic passion. Kate's posture straightened. She opened her mouth, and the knowledge she had spent years acquiring poured out. She spoke about Vermeer's use of expensive pigments like ultramarine and lead tin yellow. She discussed his signature technique of applying paint in small luminous dots, a precursor to pointillism. She detailed his unique handling of light, particularly light filtering through a leaded glass window on the left-hand side of the composition, a feature present in a majority of his surviving works. She even referenced her own thesis, explaining how microscopic analysis of the craquelure, the pattern of fine cracks on the surface of the paint, could help distinguish a 17th-century masterpiece from a modern forgery. She spoke for 10 minutes, uninterrupted. Damien listened, his expressions unreadable, his gaze never leaving her face. When she finished a little breathless, the office was silent. Damien leaned back in his chair. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his severe features into something warm and genuinely impressed. "Miss Pierce," he said, his voice laced with new respect. "That was more insightful than the analysis given to me by the head of my department, a man with 30 years of experience." He picked up a file from his desk and slid it across to her. "This is the file on The Girl with the Silver Lute. The position of junior research associate is yours if you want it. It comes with a full salary benefits and a research budget. Your first assignment will be to work with our team to authenticate and recover that painting. Your primary qualification for this job is not my sympathy. It is your mind." "Do you want it?" Tears pricked at the back of Kate's eyes, but she blinked them away. These were not tears of humiliation or despair, but of overwhelming, unbelievable gratitude. The pity she had feared was nowhere to be found. In its place was genuine opportunity, an offer extended not as a handout, but as a recognition of her skill. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Yes, Mr. Blackwood. I want it more than anything." She walked out of the Blackwood Tower an hour later, not as Catherine Pierce, the fired waitress, but as Catherine Pierce Jr. Research Associate. The city spread out before her, no longer a landscape of struggle and survival, but a horizon of infinite possibility. While Kate's world was expanding, Tiffany Sterling's was beginning to shrink. Her life with Bradley Vance was a gilded cage, beautiful from the outside, but cold and confining within. Her days were a meticulously scheduled rotation of high-end spin classes, lunches with other women whose surnames were their primary identity, and endless shopping trips to maintain the facade of effortless perfection. The incident at Aurelia had in Tiffany's mind been a triumph. She had asserted her dominance, put a lowly servant in her place, and reminded Brad of the high-maintenance prize he was lucky to have. She had regaled her friends with the story over champagne, embellishing Kate's clumsiness and her own righteous indignation. They had laughed along with her, their tinkling laughter a chorus of shared privilege. But the victory felt hollow. Brad had been strangely quiet on the drive home that night. While he had paid for a replacement dress without complaint, he had also made a passing comment that had lodged under her skin like a splinter. "You know, Tiff," he'd said, his eyes on the road, "sometimes you can be a little much." "Much," she had scoffed. "I was defending my honor. That girl was a disaster. She was a waitress who made a mistake," he'd replied, his tone weary. "The scene you made was embarrassing." The word embarrassing had stung more than any insult. It implied that she, not the waitress, had been the one to commit a social faux pas. The thought was galling. For Tiffany, her entire existence was predicated on never being embarrassing. In the weeks that followed, she noticed a subtle shift in Brad. He was more distant, his eyes glued to his phone during their lavish dinners. He started making excuses to cancel their plans, citing late-night meetings and early-morning conference calls. Tiffany knew the rhythm of his business dealings. This sudden surge in work felt fabricated. Her insecurity, a hungry creature she normally kept, sedated with luxury purchases and public displays of affection, began to stir. Her power was entirely derived from Brad. She wasn't a Sterling by birth. She was a girl from a middle-class suburb who had clawed her way into this world through sheer will and careful self-reinvention. Brad was not just her boyfriend. He was her sponsor, her validation, her brand. Without him, the gilded cage would disappear, and she'd be left with nothing. She tried to tighten her grip. She planned a surprise weekend trip to Aspen, only for him to claim a critical deal was closing. She bought tickets to a charity ball she knew he wanted to attend, but he sent his junior associate in his place. Each rejection was a small crack in the foundation of her carefully constructed life. One evening, desperate to reignite the spark, she put on a new dress, a daring, backless Tom Ford number, and surprised him at his office. She breezed past his secretary with a confident smile, intending to seduce him away from his paperwork. She found him not hunched over spreadsheets, but laughing on the phone, his voice relaxed and intimate in a way she hadn't heard in months. He saw her and his face froze. He quickly ended the call. "Tiff, what are you doing here?" There was no pleasure in his voice, only annoyance. "I came to surprise my hard-working boyfriend," she said, forcing a playful pout. "I'm busy," he said flatly, not even looking at her dress. "You should have called." "Who were you talking to?" She asked the question sharp and jealous. A client, he lied, but his eyes darted away. It was in that moment that Tiffany knew. There was someone else. She didn't know who, but the signs were unmistakable. The distance, the excuses, the secret phone calls. The gilded cage had become a prison, and she was suddenly terrified that the door was about to be opened, and she would be unceremoniously thrown out. Her world, once a glamorous whirlwind of parties and privilege, became a landscape of suspicion. She started checking his phone when he was in the shower, scrutinizing his credit card statements, analyzing every interaction he had with another woman. The confident, queenly woman who had terrorized a waitress at Aurelia was gone, replaced by a paranoid, frightened shell. Her friends noticed the change. Her laughter was brittle, her conversation always circling back to Brad. She became obsessed with appearances, posting endless photos of them on social media, with captions full of saccharine declarations of love, as if she could convince the world and perhaps herself that nothing was wrong. One afternoon, while scrolling through a local society blog, a picture caught her eye. It was from the opening of a new exhibit at the city's Contemporary Art Museum. A group of the city's elite were pictured, and standing slightly to the side, deep in conversation with the museum's director, was Damien Blackwood. Tiffany's breath caught. Blackwood was the ultimate prize, a man so wealthy and powerful he made Brad look like a small-town mayor. He was notoriously private, rarely photographed. And standing next to him, looking poised and intelligent in a simple but elegant navy blue dress, was a woman with familiar brown hair pulled back from her face. Tiffany zoomed in, her heart turning to ice. It couldn't be, but it was. It was the waitress, Catherine, the clumsy, plain girl from the restaurant. But she looked different. There was a confidence in her posture, a light in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The caption identified her Damien Blackwood and Catherine Pierce, a research associate from the Blackwood Foundation, whose team was instrumental in the exhibit's curation. Rage, pure and undiluted, surged through Tiffany. It was followed by a wave of disbelief and a profound sense of cosmic injustice. How was this possible? How could that nobody-that stain on the fabric of her evening be standing next to Damien Blackwood? It made no sense. The world had been turned upside down. The natural order of things, of the beautiful and wealthy succeeding, while the plain and poor served them, had been violated. She stared at the picture, at Kate's serene, intelligent face, and then at her own reflection in the dark screen of her phone. For the first time, Tiffany Sterling didn't see a beautiful, powerful woman. She saw the fear in her own eyes, and she realized the waitress she had tried to destroy had somehow impossibly ended up with everything. The first few weeks at the Blackwood Foundation were a whirlwind for Kate. She was given a small Spartan office with a window that looked out not onto the sweeping cityscape, but onto the brick wall of the adjacent building. It didn't matter. To Kate, it was a palace. It was a space that was hers, a place where her value was determined by the content of her mind, not the speed with which she could clear a table. The work was everything she had ever dreamed of and more. She was immersed in a world of dusty archives, high-resolution digital imagery, and scholarly texts. The case of Vermeer's The Girl with the Silver Lute was a complex, fascinating puzzle. She spent her days tracing the painting's fragmented history, cross-referencing auction records with seized Nazi inventories and the private letters of collectors. Her colleagues were initially wary of her. They were seasoned academics and art historians from Ivy League schools, and they knew she had been hired directly by Blackwood himself under unusual circumstances. They were polite but distant, watching her with scrutinizing eyes. Kate knew she had to prove herself. She worked tirelessly, arriving early and staying late. She didn't just do what was asked of her. She did more. She found a forgotten footnote in a wartime diary that provided a new lead, a crucial link in the chain of the painting's ownership. She presented her findings at a team, meeting her voice nervous, but her arguments clear and well-researched. The head of the department, the man Damien had mentioned, raised a skeptical eyebrow at first, but as she laid out her evidence, his expression shifted to one of grudging respect. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. Damien remained a distant, almost mythical figure. He was rarely on the 50th floor, spending most of his time in his executive suite on the 60th, or flying to one of his company's international offices, but he was clearly keeping track of her progress. Occasionally an email would arrive from him at an odd hour, 2 a.m., 5 a.m., with a single incisive question about her research or a link to an obscure article he thought she might find useful. Each one was a reminder that he was watching, that he was invested in her success. Their relationship remained strictly professional, but a current of something else ran beneath the surface. One evening, Kate was working late, the only person left in the department, when he appeared in the doorway of her office. He had shed his suit jacket, and his sleeves were rolled up to his forearms. He looked tired. "Burning the midnight oil?" "Miss Pierce?" he asked, his voice softer than she was used to. "The trail for the Vermeer gets cold after 1948, she said, gesturing to the mountain of papers on her desk. "I'm trying to find where it went." He walked into the office, his presence seeming to fill the small space. He leaned over her desk, looking at a map she had pinned to a corkboard covered in strings and notes. His scent, a subtle mix of expensive cologne and clean laundry, was distracting. "You're looking in the wrong place," he said, his finger tracing a line from Germany to South America. Many of the high-ranking officials who fled after the war established new lives in Argentina. They took their stolen treasures with them. Look for shipping manifests into Buenos Aires between 1948 and 1952. It was a lead no one else had considered. It was brilliant. "Thank you, Mr. Blackwood," she said, looking up at him. Their eyes met, and for a moment, the space between them felt charged with an unspoken energy. He wasn't just her boss. He was the man who had seen her at her lowest, and had, for reasons she still didn't fully understand, decided to lift her up. "Call me Damien," he said quietly, "and I should be thanking you, Kate. Your work has been exceptional." He called her Kate. The shift from the formal Miss Pierce was not lost on her. His lead proved fruitful. Within 2 weeks, they had traced the painting to a private vault in Geneva, owned by the estate of a former Argentine industrialist with a shadowy past. The process of repatriation was delicate and would take months of legal maneuvering, but they had found it. Kate had been the key. To celebrate, Damien invited the entire team to dinner, not at a stuffy formal place like Aurelia, but a small, authentic Italian restaurant in a quiet neighborhood. The atmosphere was relaxed and jovial. Kate, for the first time, felt like a true member of the team. Her colleagues clapped her on the back and praised her work, their earlier skepticism replaced by genuine camaraderie. At the end of the night, Damien offered to drive her home. In the quiet intimacy of his car, a sleek, understated Bentley, the professional barrier between them seemed to dissolve completely. "I have a confession to make," he said, his eyes on the road. "The night I met you, I wasn't at Aurelia for the scallops." Kate turned to look at his profile in the dim glow of the dashboard lights. "Oh, my grandfather was an artist," he continued. "A painter. Not famous, but talented. He was Jewish. He and my grandmother fled Amsterdam in 1941. They were forced to leave everything behind, including all of his paintings. He never painted again. He died believing his life's work was lost forever." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "For the last 10 years, I have been using my foundation's resources to find his work. We've recovered 12 pieces so far. The work we do, it's not just an academic exercise for me. It's personal. That's why your passion for it resonated with me." Kate was speechless. Suddenly everything made sense. His presence at the restaurant, his pointed questions, his investment in her success. It was all connected to a deep personal mission. "Damien," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." "Don't be," he said, pulling up in front of her modest apartment building. be the person who helps get these things back to the people they belong to. You are already doing that." He turned to face her, his dark eyes searching hers. "Kate, I know this is unorthodox, but I was wondering if you would be willing to have dinner with me this Saturday. Not as my employee, but just as you." Her heart leapt. This was the moment everything changed again. The metamorphosis from waitress to researcher had been about her mind. This was about her heart. "I'd like that very much," she said, a real unguarded smile spreading across her face. As she got out of the car and watched the Bentley pull away, Kate knew her life had been irrevocably altered. She had shed the skin of the invisible girl. She was stepping into the light not as someone's charity case, but as a woman who was valued for her intellect, her passion, and her character. And she was about to have dinner with the man who had seen it all along. The Blackwood Foundation's annual charity gala was the undisputed crown jewel of the city's social calendar. It was an event where old money mingled with new, where titans of industry clinked glasses with celebrated artists, and where fortunes were pledged to philanthropic causes. This year the gala was being held at the Grand Astoria Hotel, and its centerpiece was the official unveiling of the recovered Vermeer, the girl with the silver lute. For Kate, attending the gala felt like the final scene of a play in which she had been inexplicably cast as the lead. 6 months ago, she had been serving canapés at events like this. Tonight, she was arriving on the arm of Damien Blackwood. Her transformation was complete. Damien had insisted on buying her a gown, waving away her protests with a simple, "You are representing the foundation." And me. The dress was a masterpiece of deep emerald silk that shimmered under the light, its elegant cut highlighting a newfound confidence in her posture. Her hair was swept up in a graceful chignon, and a simple diamond necklace, a gift from Damien, who had told her it belonged to his grandmother, rested at her collarbone. When she looked in the mirror, she saw a stranger she was finally beginning to recognize as herself. The weariness was gone from her eyes, replaced by a bright, clear-eyed intelligence. The timid waitress was a ghost of the past. In her place stood a poised, accomplished woman. Their arrival at the gala caused a stir. The paparazzi, who usually reserved their frenzy for movie stars and royalty, erupted in a flash of cameras as Damien's Bentley pulled up. He was notoriously private, and his appearance with a beautiful unknown woman on his arm was a major scoop. He guided Kate through the storm, his hand resting securely in the small of her back, his presence a calm, protective shield. Inside the ballroom was a breathtaking spectacle of crystal chandeliers and cascading flowers. Damien was immediately surrounded by people vying for his attention, but he kept Kate close, introducing her not as his date, but as his partner. "This is Catherine Pierce," he would say, his voice filled with pride. Her brilliant research was the key to recovering the Vermeer. With every introduction, Kate's confidence grew. She spoke eloquently about the painting, her passion for the subject captivating senators and CEOs alike. She was no longer an accessory. She was a presence in her own right. They were standing near the bar when Kate saw them, Bradley Vance and Tiffany Sterling. They were holding court in a small circle, Tiffany's laugh as sharp and attention-grabbing as ever. She was wearing a garish feathered dress that screamed for attention. Tiffany saw her first. Her eyes widened in disbelief, her champagne flute freezing halfway to her lips. She nudged Brad, who followed her gaze. His jaw literally dropped. He stared at Kate as if he were seeing a ghost, a beautiful, impossibly elegant ghost. For a moment, the world seemed to slow down. Kate's heart gave a single hard thud. This was the moment she had subconsciously dreaded and perhaps craved. the final confrontation. Tiffany, recovering her composure, plastered a venomous smile on her face and began to walk towards them, dragging Brad behind her. "Well, well," she said, her voice dripping with saccharine condescension. "Look what the cat dragged in. I didn't realize they were letting the help attend this year." She looked Kate up and down her eyes, lingering on the dress. "That's a lovely rental, dear." "You clean up surprisingly well." Brad looked mortified. "Tiff don't." But Tiffany was on a roll, fueled by jealousy and the shock of seeing her former victim so spectacularly elevated. "So who are you here with? Did you manage to snag a lonely old widower to be your sugar daddy for the evening?" Before Kate could respond, Damien stepped slightly in front of her, his movement subtle but definitive. He looked down at Tiffany from his considerable height, his expression one of pure glacial contempt. "Ms. Sterling." I believe he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that cut through the surrounding chatter. "I am Damien Blackwood, and this is my fiancée, Catherine Pierce." The word fiancée dropped into the conversation like a bomb. Tiffany's face went slack with shock. Her perfectly painted jaw hung open. She stared from Damien to Kate, her mind refusing to compute the reality of the situation. "Fiancé, to the Damien Blackwood." It was impossible. Brad's face paled. He looked at Kate, truly looked at her, and saw not the clumsy waitress he'd allowed his girlfriend to abuse, but a woman of elegance, intelligence, and power. A woman who was now completely, utterly out of his league. The magnitude of his mistake hit him with the force of a physical blow. Fiancée Tiffany finally choked out her voice, a strangled whisper. "You're lying." Damien raised an eyebrow. "I assure you I have no reason to lie. Kate is the most brilliant, compassionate, and dignified woman I have ever met. Whereas you—" He let his gaze sweep over her in a deliberately dismissive appraisal. "You are merely the loudest person in the room. There is a difference." The insult was surgical, devastating. It struck at the very heart of Tiffany's identity. She who had built her entire world on being seen and admired had just been dismissed as nothing more than noise. Then Brad did something that sealed their fate. He turned to Kate, his eyes wide with a desperate, pathetic plea. "Kate. Catherine. I am so sorry about that night. Tiffany, she wasn't herself. You look incredible. We should talk sometime." It was a clumsy, transparent attempt to hedge his bets, to crawl back into the orbit of power. Kate looked at him, and she felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just a profound sense of pity. He was as hollow as the woman standing next to him. She gave him a small, cool smile. "I don't think we have anything to talk about, Bradley," she said, her voice calm and steady. "You and I exist in very different worlds." With that, she turned her back on them. Damien placed his hand on hers, his touch warm and reassuring. Together they walked away, leaving Tiffany and Brad standing in the middle of the ballroom, utterly humiliated. The circle of listeners that had surrounded them had melted away, eager to distance themselves from the social wreckage. Tiffany's face was a mask of fury and shame, her gilded world shattered by the woman she had tried so hard to break. Kate didn't look back. Her past was behind her, and her future was waiting. The news of Damien Blackwood's engagement to a previously unknown art historian became the city's favorite fairy tale. But for Kate, it was never about the status. In the quiet of their penthouse, overlooking the glittering city, their relationship was defined not as a rescue, but as a partnership. "You didn't rescue me, Damien," she told him. "You empowered me." He had sought an equal partner whose strength of character could match his, and he had found her. A final echo from her past arrived via messenger, a letter from Bradley Vance. It contained a check large enough to solve all her old problems and a remorseful note explaining he had left Tiffany, whose cruelty had become too much to bear. Looking at the check, Kate felt no temptation, only closure. She promptly donated the entire sum to a legal aid fund for wrongfully dismissed service workers. She read later that Tiffany had faded into social obscurity, a quiet testament to the fact that her gilded world had been hollow all along. Kate's future was a canvas of her own creation. After being promoted to head the Arts and Antiquities department, her ultimate triumph was realized a year later. She stood with Damien in the newly opened Pierce Blackwood wing of the City Museum, dedicated to repatriated art. In the center of the gallery, illuminated by a soft light, was The Girl with the Silver Lute. As they watched school children gather around it, Damien wrapped his arms around her waist. "Look what you built," he whispered. Kate smiled a deep, genuine smile of contentment. She had once been an invisible girl defined by a stain, but she had become a woman who curated not only art, but her own destiny. A person's true worth is never defined by their job, their uniform, or the price tag on their clothes. It's measured in their character, their resilience, and the quiet dignity they maintain when the world is at its cruelest. Catherine's story is a powerful reminder that the person you look down on today might be the one you're looking up to tomorrow. Life has a funny way of rewarding integrity and exposing the hollow nature of pride and arrogance. Her journey from a humiliated waitress to a celebrated philanthropist and beloved fiancé wasn't a stroke of luck. It was the result of a powerful man recognizing the true value that others were too blind to see. If this story resonated with you, and if you believe in the power of character over circumstance, please take a moment to hit that like button and share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire challenge and remind us of the incredible twists and turns of real life. Thank you for listening. What if the person you dismissed as invisible, the one you treated as nothing more than an obstacle in your path, was secretly the one who held your entire world in their hands? This isn't a fairy tale. It's a story about the deceptive nature of power and the quiet strength of those we overlook. It's about a waitress named Clara Evans, whose worn-out shoes and tired smile concealed a secret that was about to bring the city's most arrogant billionaire, Damien Sterling, to his knees. It's a reminder that karma doesn't always send a warning, and sometimes the bill comes due in the most unexpected way imaginable. Stay with us to hear how a single glass of spilled wine in a high-end restaurant triggered the collapse of an empire. The Gilded Sparrow wasn't just a restaurant, it was a theatre. Every night the same play was performed under the soft glow of crystal chandeliers. The actors were the city's elite, the tech moguls, the banking scions, the old money matriarchs, and the stagehands were people like Clara Evans. Her role was simple: be swift, be silent, and above all, be invisible. At 28, Clara wore her waitress uniform like a second skin. It was a well-tailored but drab grey dress, a canvas onto which the wealthy patrons could project their own importance. She had learned the geography of this world intimately, the precise angle to pour the Chateau Margaux to avoid a single drop marring the white linen, the exact moment to clear a plate without interrupting the flow of a multi-million-dollar conversation, and the carefully neutral expression to maintain when a dismissive hand was waved in her face. Clara wasn't born into this life of servitude. In fact, her life had been a quiet academic one. She'd graduated with a degree in art history, dreaming of curating galleries and preserving beauty. But life, as it so often does, had other plans. A family illness had drained her savings, and her father's death a year ago had left her unmoored adrift in a sea of debt and grief. The Gilded Sparrow with its lucrative tips was a life raft. It was meant to be temporary, a stopgap, until she could find her footing again. But months had bled into 2 years, and the apron strings felt more like chains every day. Her colleagues saw her as quiet and efficient. They knew she was smart. She'd sometimes help their kids with homework, questions they couldn't answer, but they assumed her past was as unremarkable as her present. No one knew about the worn copy of Proust in her locker, or the sketches of Renaissance architecture she drew on napkins during her break. To them she was just Clara, reliable, steady, forgettable. This particular Tuesday evening was no different. The air hummed with the low thrum of expensive chatter. Clara moved between tables with a practiced grace, her mind a whirlwind of orders, allergies, and special requests. Table 7 needed more bread. Table 12's steak was to be butterfly cut, medium well, a culinary sin she was paid not to judge. Her manager Marcus, a perpetually stressed man whose smile never quite reached his eyes, pulled her aside near the service station. "Clara, table 3. It's Damien Sterling. You know the drill." Clara's stomach tightened. Everyone knew the drill with Mr. Sterling. He was the CEO of Sterling Prescott Holdings, a massive luxury goods conglomerate that owned everything from boutique hotels to high-fashion labels. He was a titan of industry, a regular fixture in Forbes, and notoriously the worst customer in the city. He treated service staff like dirt beneath his custom-made Italian leather shoes. The unspoken rule was to give him what he wanted before he knew he wanted it, and never ever make a mistake. He's with the board from a Japanese firm they're trying to acquire. "High stakes," Marcus whispered, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple. "Just be perfect." Clara nodded, her expression unreadable. "Of course, Marcus." She took a deep breath, straightened her apron, and approached the table. Damien Sterling sat at the head holding court. He was exactly as his public image suggested, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, a ridiculously expensive watch on his wrist, and a look of bored arrogance etched onto his handsome face. He wasn't speaking. He was pontificating his voice, a smooth, confident baritone that cut through the restaurant's ambient noise. His guests, 3 impeccably dressed Japanese businessmen and a younger, nervous-looking associate, listened with rapt attention. "The market waits for no one," Sterling was saying, gesturing with a hand that had clearly never seen a day of hard labor. "Sentimentality legacy. These are anchors. You cut them loose or you sink." Clara waited for a pause that never came. Finally, she stepped forward. "Good evening, Mr. Sterling. Gentlemen, may I offer you an aperitif while you look over the menu?" Sterling didn't even look at her. He simply raised one finger, a gesture that said, "Wait." Clara froze, her body held in a state of suspended service, a living statue in a grey dress. She could feel the heat rising in her cheeks, the familiar sting of humiliation. She wasn't a person to him. She was an interruption. After finishing his point with a self-satisfied smirk, he finally turned his head, his cold blue eyes scanning her from head to toe with a look of utter disinterest. "We'll start with a bottle of the 82 Petrus," he said, his tone suggesting he was ordering a soda. He hadn't glanced at the wine list. He didn't need to. He was the kind of man who knew the most expensive thing on it by heart. "An excellent choice," Sir Clara replied, her voice professionally placid. He waved a dismissive hand, already turning back to his guests. "Just bring it." As Clara walked towards the wine cellar, she could feel his presence like a physical weight on the entire room. He was a black hole of ego, pulling all light and energy towards himself. She thought of her father, Arthur. He had been a businessman too, a small-scale builder who knew every one of his employees by name. He believed a company was a family, that its foundation was respect. Men like Damien Sterling were everything her father had despised. They built empires on the backs of invisible people, never once thinking to look down. Little did she know her father's world and Damien Sterling's were about to collide with her standing at the epicenter. And in her locker next to the copy of Proust was a thick manila envelope from a law firm, an envelope she hadn't yet found the courage to open. The 82 Waitress was stored in the deep cellar, a hallowed space where bottles worth more than Clara's car rested in silent, temperature-controlled reverence. She retrieved it with the care of a museum curator handling a priceless artifact. The bottle was cool and heavy in her hands, a vessel of fermented history. For a fleeting moment, she wondered what it tasted like, this nectar of the gods that men like Sterling consumed so casually. Returning to the table, she presented the bottle to him as protocol dictated. Again, he didn't look at her, merely grunting his approval. Clara began the delicate ritual of opening the wine. The cork came out with a soft, satisfying sigh. She poured a small amount into a decanter, the deep, ruby liquid swirling like liquid velvet. Then she poured a tasting measure into Sterling's glass. He picked it up, swirled it with an air of practiced connoisseurship, and took a sip. He held the wine in his mouth for a moment, before swallowing. Fine, he declared, not to her, but to the table at large, as if the wine had simply materialized in his glass. Clara began to pour for his guests. She moved with practiced economical movements, her focus entirely on the task. She served the Japanese businessman first, her hands steady, her presence unobtrusive. As she moved around the table to pour for Sterling's young associate, a man named Peterson, he shifted suddenly in his seat, nervously adjusting his tie. His elbow jutted out, knocking Clara's arm just as she was tilting the decanter. Time seemed to slow down. The heavy crystal decanter slipped from her grasp, and the world became a tableau of impending disaster. She saw the dark red cascade of wine, a beautiful, terrible arc through the air. It didn't land on the table. It didn't land on the floor. It landed squarely on the front of Damien Sterling's crisp white $1,000 shirt. Silence. A collective gasp seemed to be sucked out of the room. All conversation at the surrounding tables ceased. Every eye in the Gilded Sparrow was on table 3. The wine spread across Sterling's shirt like a grotesque blooming flower. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "I am so sorry, Mr. Sterling," she stammered, her professional composure shattered. "It was an accident. Before she could finish, Damien Sterling rose slowly from his chair. His face, moments before a mask of casual arrogance, was now a thundercloud of pure fury. His blue eyes, once cold, were now blazing. He looked down at the crimson stain on his chest, then up at her. He didn't shout. His voice, when it came, was low, controlled, and infinitely more terrifying than any yell. An accident, he hissed each word, a venomous dart. "Do you have any idea what this shirt costs? It costs more than you make in a month. But that's not the point, is it?" He took a step closer, invading her personal space, forcing her to look up at him. She could smell the expensive cologne, the wine on his breath. "The point," he continued, his voice dripping with contempt, "is incompetence. The point is that I come here to conduct business, to entertain important partners, and I am subjected to this clumsiness." He gestured vaguely at her, as if she were a piece of faulty equipment. His associate Peterson was pale with terror. "Sir, it was my fault. I moved my arm. Quiet, Peterson," Sterling snapped without looking at him. His laser focus was entirely on Clara. "People like you," he said to her, his voice dropping even lower, "are supposed to be invisible. You are background. You are furniture that moves. Your one job is not to screw up, and you can't even do that. What is your name?" Clara's throat was dry. "Clara, sir." He let out a short, mirthless laugh. "Clara, of course. A name as forgettable as your face." He leaned in his voice, a conspiratorial whisper that everyone at the table could hear. "Let me give you a piece of life advice, Clara. Some people are born to lead, to create, to matter. And some people are born to pour the wine. Know your place. You are utterly and completely insignificant." The words struck her harder than a physical blow. It wasn't just the anger. It was the casual cruelty, the deep-seated belief behind his words. He genuinely saw her as a lesser being. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot, coiling serpent in her gut. She could feel the stares of every person in the restaurant burning into her back. Marcus was now rushing over his face, a mask of frantic apology. "Mr. Sterling, I am terribly, terribly sorry. On behalf of the Gilded Sparrow, please, this entire meal is on us, and this employee will be dealt with immediately." Sterling shot Marcus a look that could curdle milk. "See that she is." He then turned to his Japanese guests, his demeanor shifting instantly back to one of oily charm, though his rage still simmered just beneath the surface. "Gentlemen, my sincerest apologies for this unfortunate interruption. A minor domestic disturbance. Please allow me to arrange for a private room where we can continue our discussion away from the help." He threw one last look of disgust at Clara, a look that said, "You are nothing," before striding away, leaving a trail of stunned silence in his wake. Clara stood frozen, the shattered remains of the decanter at her feet. The deep red wine pooled on the floor, looking unnervingly like blood. At that moment, something inside her shifted. The shame was still there, but beneath it, a different emotion began to smoulder. It was a cold, hard ember of anger, insignificant, forgettable, furniture that moves. She looked down at her hands, the hands that had cared for a dying mother, the hands that sketched buildings and paid bills. They were capable hands. She was not nothing. As Marcus began to gently guide her away from the scene, her mind went back to the unopened envelope in her locker. It was from the firm of Finch, Covington and Dunn, the executors of her late father's estate. She had been putting off opening it, afraid of what legal complexities and final goodbyes it might contain. But now Damien Sterling's cruel words echoed in her mind, and a new resolve took root. She would not be insignificant, and she had a sudden, powerful feeling that whatever was in that envelope was about to change everything. The walk to the staff locker room felt like a mile-long march of shame. The whispers of her colleagues, a mixture of pity and morbid curiosity, followed her. Marcus was surprisingly gentle. He didn't fire her on the spot as she'd expected. "Take the rest of the night off, Clara," he said softly, handing her a glass of water. "Go home, we'll talk tomorrow." He knew a lawsuit for wrongful termination was the last thing the restaurant needed after a scene with a man like Sterling. But Clara didn't go home. She sank onto the hard bench in the locker room, the adrenaline from the confrontation leaving her hands trembling. Sterling's words played on a loop in her head. "Some people are born to pour the wine. Know your place." Her eyes fell on her locker, on the envelope. With a newfound urgency, she fumbled with the lock, her shaking fingers struggling with the combination. She pulled out the thick, cream-colored envelope. The embossed logo of Finch, Covington and Dunn seemed to stare up at her with an air of immense gravity. Her father, Arthur Prescott, had always used this firm. He had trusted one of the senior partners, Alistair Finch, implicitly. She tore it open. Inside was a letter several pages long, written on heavy bond paper, and a smaller sealed envelope marked, "For Clara in my own hand." She unfolded the official letter first. The legalese was dense, but the core message was shockingly clear. It spoke of trusts of holding companies and of share structures so complex they made her head spin. Her father, a man she'd always thought of as a successful but modest builder, had been far more. The small company she knew, Prescott Construction, was merely the sentimental heart of a much larger and far wealthier entity. Years ago, seeking to expand, Arthur Prescott had entered into a partnership, forming a holding company to acquire and manage other businesses. The name of that holding company was Sterling Prescott Holdings. Clara read the sentence again and again. A cold dread mingled with a dawning, terrifying sense of disbelief washed over her. It couldn't be. It was a coincidence, a cruel joke by the universe. But there was no mistake. The letter detailed how her father, Arthur Prescott, had been the majority shareholder. He had retained 51% of the voting shares, a controlling interest he had never relinquished. His partner, a young, ambitious executive named Damien Sterling, controlled the other 49%. After Arthur's health had begun to fail, he had stepped back from day-to-day operations, ceding the role of CEO to Sterling under a strict contractual agreement. But he had always remained the quiet, guiding force, the true owner. And then came the final earth-shattering paragraph. As per the unalterable terms of the primary trust established by Mr. Arthur Prescott upon his death, his entire controlling interest of 51% in Sterling Prescott Holdings, along with all associated assets, passes directly and wholly to his sole heir, his daughter, Clara Annalise Evans. She was no longer Clara Evans. In the eyes of the law, she was Clara Prescott. She had used her mother's maiden name after her parents' divorce to give herself a sense of independence, a choice her father had always respected. The letter slipped from her fingers and fluttered to the floor. She stared at the grimy linoleum, her mind a blank slate of shock. Damien Sterling, the man who had just called her insignificant, forgettable furniture. The man who ran his company with an iron fist and a contempt for the little people. He wasn't the owner, he was an employee. And she, Clara, the clumsy waitress, was his new boss. The irony was so staggering, so profoundly absurd, that she almost laughed. It was a hollow, breathless sound in the empty locker room. The universe didn't just have a sense of humor, it had a taste for brutal, poetic justice. Her hands, no longer shaking, reached for the second envelope. Her father's familiar, strong handwriting was a comfort and a pain. She opened it. My dearest Clara, if you are reading this, then my time is over. I hope my passing was peaceful, and I hope you are not alone. I have so many regrets, my girl. The biggest is that I didn't tell you the full truth of my life's work. I kept it from you to protect you, to allow you to find your own path without the weight of my legacy. I see now that this may have been a mistake. It was pride. I wanted you to be an art historian, not a businesswoman. But the company is yours now. It is your burden and your opportunity. It was built on a simple principle that quality and integrity matter more than profit, and that the people who work for you are your greatest asset, not lines on a spreadsheet. I fear my partner Damien has forgotten this. He is brilliant, but he lacks a heart. He sees the world in numbers, not in people. Do with this inheritance what you will, my love. Sell it, run it, or burn it to the ground. It is yours. But I ask one thing of you before you make your decision. Look. Truly look. Understand what it is you now own. Understand the people whose livelihoods depend on it. My lawyer, Alistair Finch, will help you. He is the only man I ever trusted more than myself, Be strong, be wise. But most of all, be the good and kind woman I always knew you were. All my love, forever dad tears, streamed down Clara's face, hot and silent. They were tears of grief for her father, but also tears of a strange, terrifying clarity. His final words were a call to action. Look. Truly look. She looked at her reflection in the small locker mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed, her hair slightly askew. She was still wearing the drab grey uniform of the Gilded Sparrow, but when she looked into her own eyes, she saw something new. The smouldering ember of anger had been fanned into a flame. It was no longer just about the personal humiliation. It was about her father's legacy. Damien Sterling, the man who preached about cutting away sentimentality and legacy, was actively destroying the very principles upon which her company was built. A plan began to form in her mind, audacious and terrifying. She would not march into the Sterling Prescott headquarters tomorrow and announce herself. He wouldn't respect her. He would see the waitress and fight her with every legal and corporate weapon he had. He had to be shown, not told. He needed to be undone by the very thing he despised, the insignificant person he never saw coming. She would follow her father's advice. She would look. She would stay right where she was in the shadows. She would be Clara, the waitress. She would watch, she would listen, and she would learn. And when the time was right, the furniture would stand up, and Damien Sterling would finally know her name. She picked up her phone and dialed the number for Alistair Finch. Mr. Finch. She said, her voice quiet but firm, laced with a steel she didn't know she possessed. This is Clara Prescott. We need to talk, and we need to be discreet. The next 2 weeks were a masterclass in duality. By day, Clara was a ghost in the corporate machine of Sterling Prescott Holdings. By night, she was a ghost in the dining room of the Gilded Sparrow. Her meeting with Alistair Finch had been a revelation. He was an older gentleman with kind eyes that held a lawyer's shrewd intelligence. He had been expecting her call. He treated her not as a grieving daughter or a bewildered waitress, but as the rightful owner of a billion-dollar enterprise. Your father was a brilliant man, Ms. Prescott Finch had said, sitting opposite her in his stately wood-panelled office. He saw Damien Sterling's ambition and his ruthlessness. He hoped to temper it with his own philosophy, but he also put safeguards in place. Your 51% ownership is ironclad. The board can advise, but they cannot overrule you. You are, for all intents and purposes, the queen on the chessboard. Clara, who felt more like a pawn, outlined her plan. She didn't want to just take over. She wanted to understand the company from the inside out. She wanted to see the rot that Damien had introduced. Finch had smiled. An undercover boss. Very unorthodox. Your father would have admired your audacity. He became her guide, her cue to her James Bond. He granted her top-level anonymous access to the company's servers. From a cheap laptop in her small apartment, Clara logged in under a pseudonym A. Prescott began to dig. What she found was worse than she had imagined. Her father's company, once known for its craftsmanship and employee loyalty, was being systematically hollowed out. She started with the financials. Profits were up, astronomically so, but the methods were brutal. Damien had outsourced manufacturing for their signature leather goods line to overseas factories with questionable labor practices, replacing skilled artisans who had been with the company for decades. The quality had dipped a fact, hidden by an aggressive marketing campaign. Then she found the personnel files. She saw a pattern of corporate restructuring that targeted older, higher-paid employees, replacing them with younger, cheaper staff. The pension fund had been restructured to minimize company contributions. The most damning discovery was a file labeled AP Legacy Fund. It was a philanthropic initiative. Her father had started a fund that provided scholarships for the children of employees and emergency financial aid for families in crisis. It was his heart and soul codified. Under Damien's leadership, the fund had been quietly drained, its capital reallocated to cover executive bonuses and marketing overages. He was literally taking money from the families of his workers to pad his own pockets and sell a lie of superior quality. The anger she had felt in the restaurant now had a target. It wasn't just about his personal insult to her. It was about his systemic betrayal of thousands of people of her father's entire life's work. During the day, she devoured reports and spreadsheets. She learned the names of the board members, Evelyn Reed, the razor-sharp CFO, who was fiercely loyal to Damien, George Hammond, an old friend of her father's, who had been increasingly marginalized, and two others who seemed to vote whichever way the wind of power was blowing. At night, she would put on her grey uniform and return to the Gilded Sparrow. Marcus had been relieved when she'd shown up for her next shift, apologizing profusely and offering to keep her away from the main dining room. But Clara had insisted. "I'm fine, Marcus," she'd said. "I need the money." Working there was now a surreal experience. She would serve men and women who unknowingly sat on the board of her own company. She listened to their conversations, piecing together the corporate power dynamics from snippets of overheard gossip. She learned that George Hammond was deeply unhappy with the company's direction, and that Evelyn Reed was Damien's enforcer, feared by all. One evening, George Hammond came in for dinner alone. He looked tired and defeated. Clara was assigned his table. He was polite but distracted. "Is everything all right?" Sir Clara asked, as she refilled his water. He looked up at her. Really looked at her for the first time. "It's a long story, young lady. Have you ever felt like you're watching something you helped build get torn down brick by brick?" Clara's heart pounded in her chest. "I think I know the feeling," she said, her voice soft. "This place used to stand for something." He mumbled more to himself than to her. Arthur Prescott. He was a good man. He believed in building things to last. Now, it's all just about the next quarter. The soul is gone. The conversation was a small spark of hope. She had an ally, even if he didn't know it yet. Her most nerve-wracking nights were when Damien Sterling returned. He came in twice more during those 2 weeks. He never once recognized her. To him, she was just another part of the scenery. The first time, he was with a glamorous model and ignored Clara so completely it was as if she were a ghost. The second time was different. He was meeting with a journalist for a puff piece. Clara watched him spin a web of lies, speaking passionately about Sterling Prescott's commitment to artisanal quality and employee empowerment. He even mentioned the Prescott Legacy Fund as one of his key initiatives, describing it as thriving. Clara had to grip the serving tray so tightly her knuckles turned white to keep from shouting right there in the middle of the restaurant. He was using her father's memory as a marketing tool while simultaneously desecrating it. That was the moment her plan crystallized. It wasn't enough to expose him. It wasn't enough to fire him. She had to dismantle his entire false reality in front of the very people whose respect he craved. She needed a stage, and she knew just the one. She called Alistair Finch the next morning. "Mr. Finch, when is the next quarterly board meeting?" "Next Friday the 24th, he replied. "Damien is set to announce record-breaking profits. He's planning to propose a massive stock buyback that will net him a personal bonus of over $20 million. "Perfect," Clara said, a cold calm settling over her. "Please send an anonymous message to the board. Inform them that a representative of the Prescott estate will be in attendance to observe the proceedings." "A representative?" Finch asked, a hint of excitement in his voice. "Yes," Clara replied, looking at her reflection. She wasn't a waitress or a ghost anymore. Tell them the majority shareholder is sending someone to protect her interests. Let him sweat for a week. Let him wonder who is coming for his crown. The game was on. The anonymous email from Finch, Covington and Dunn landed in the inboxes of the Sterling Prescott board members like a perfectly timed grenade. It was brief, professional, and utterly destabilizing. To the board of directors of Sterling Prescott Holdings, please be advised that a representative of the Prescott estate will be in attendance at the quarterly meeting on October the 24th. The representative will be acting with the full authority of the majority shareholder to observe the proceedings and ensure her interests are being properly represented. Sincerely, Alistair Finch, Senior Partner, Finch, Covington and Dunn. The ripple effects were immediate. Clara, monitoring internal communications through her back-channel access, watched the panic unfold. Damien Sterling, who ruled his domain with absolute certainty, was suddenly faced with an unknown variable. The Prescott estate had been silent for a year. A sleeping giant he had likely assumed would stay asleep forever. The heir, an unknown daughter he'd never bothered to track down, was a non-entity in his mind. Now this ghost was sending a proxy. His emails to Evelyn Reed, the CFO, were frantic and demanding. Who is this? What do they want? Did Finch give you any names? Is it a bank? A trust manager? Evelyn's replies were clipped and efficient, but Clara could read the underlying tension. Finch is a locked box, Damien. He said only that the representatives would make themselves known at the meeting. Damien's paranoia went into overdrive. He ordered a complete audit of all departmental reports, demanding that every number be triple-checked. He scheduled extra prep meetings, grilling his vice presidents until they were pale with exhaustion. He was a man trying to find a crack in his own fortress, terrified that someone else had already found it. Clara saw her chance to subtly test the waters. Working with Finch, she had him send a single follow-up query to George Hammond, the old board member who had lamented the company's direction. The query was simple. The Prescott estate has concerns regarding the dissolution of the AP Legacy Fund. Can you provide any context? The response was telling. George Hammond wrote back a long, heartfelt email detailing his objections to the fund's closure and his failed attempts to argue for its preservation. He attached the original meeting minutes, where Damien had railroaded the decision through framing it as a necessary fiscal consolidation. In contrast, when Finch sent the same query to Evelyn Reed, her response was a single, cold sentence. All fiscal reallocations were approved by the board and are in full compliance with corporate bylaws. The battle lines were being drawn before the first shot was even fired. Meanwhile, Clara's life at the Gilded Sparrow continued. She was now a spy in plain sight. One evening, just 3 days before the board meeting, Damien Sterling came in with Evelyn Reed for a strategy dinner. They chose a secluded booth, but not secluded enough for Clara, who made sure she was the one assigned to their section. She approached the table notepad in hand, her face a perfect mask of professional deference. "Good evening." "May I get you something to drink?" Damien didn't even look up from the papers spread across the table. "Scotch. Macallan, 25. "Neat." Evelyn Reed, however, did look up. Her sharp, intelligent eyes lingered on Clara for a fraction of a second longer than necessary. It was a look Clara had seen before from powerful people, a quick, dismissive scan to categorize and file away. Waitress. Unimportant. Move on. The moment passed, and she ordered sparkling water. For the next 2 hours, Clara served them refilling drinks, delivering their food, and listening to every word. Their conversation was a chilling window into their worldview. The Prescott ghost is spooking the street. Damien grumbled, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "We need to present a united front. The numbers are undeniable. Profit is the only thing that matters. This representative, whoever he is, will be a bean counter from a bank. Show him the money and he'll crawl back into his hole. And Hammond Evelyn asked, her voice low. George is a dinosaur. Damien sneered. He's still living in the era of company picnics and gold watches. He'll make some sentimental speech about Arthur's vision. I'll let him, and then we'll vote him down. As always. Clara felt a fresh wave of cold fury. They were so certain, so arrogant in their private bubble of power. But it was Damien's next words that truly cemented her resolve. Evelyn pushed a file towards him. This is the final proposal for the V-Series handbag line. It involves closing the last domestic workshop in Ohio. We'll be laying off the remaining 60 artisans. It will increase our profit margin by another 4%. Damien barely glanced at it. Do it. They're overpaid anyway. Any skilled worker who thinks they're irreplaceable in a global economy is a fool. They're cogs in a machine, and cogs can be replaced. He took a long sip of his scotch. Sentiment is a liability. Clara stood by the service station, polishing a wine glass her back to them. Cogs in a machine. The phrase echoed in her mind. Her father had known the names of the men and women in that Ohio workshop. He had called them artists. She walked back to their table to clear the dessert plates. As she reached for Damien's empty plate, he looked up, annoyed by the interruption. His eyes met hers. For a second, there was a flicker of something, a vague, misplaced sense of familiarity. He had seen her face before, recently. But where? The restaurant, another one. 1,000 different service people passed through his life. They were all a blur. He frowned, then dismissed the thought as quickly as it came. He waved a hand at her. Just the check. As Clara ran his credit card, she looked at the name, embossed on the platinum plastic, Damien Sterling. Below it, in smaller letters, CEO Sterling Prescott Holdings. She handed the receipt back to him. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Have a good evening. Her voice was steady, her expression neutral. But inside she was making a vow. He would not close that workshop. He would not lay off those artisans. He would not win. He thought he was playing chess with a ghost, a faceless representative from a law firm. He had no idea he was sitting 3 feet away from the Queen, and she was about to checkmate him. The morning of October 24th dawned grey, and overcast the sky, a blanket of steel over the city. Clara woke before sunrise. There was no waitress uniform laid out for her today. Instead, hanging on the back of her bedroom door was an outfit she had purchased with the last of her own money, a deliberate choice. It was a simple, elegant, dark charcoal pantsuit. It wasn't flashy, but it was perfectly tailored. It spoke of seriousness and authority, not wealth. It was a uniform of a different kind. She showered and got dressed, the unfamiliar fabric feeling strange against her skin. This was armor. As she styled her hair into a simple professional bun, she looked at herself in the mirror. The tired, harried waitress was gone. The woman looking back at her was someone else. Her eyes were clear and focused, holding a quiet intensity. The weeks of digging, listening, and planning had forged a new confidence in her. She was no longer just Arthur Prescott's daughter. She was the guardian of his legacy. A car sent by Alistair Finch was waiting for her downstairs. She spent the ride to the Sterling Prescott Tower, going over her notes one last time. It was a formidable stack financial reports, highlighting the disparity between rising profits and declining quality, damning internal emails, a detailed analysis of the gutted legacy fund, and most importantly, a list of names. The names of the artisans in the Ohio workshop. The names of the long-term employees who had been forced into early retirement. The names of the children whose scholarships had vanished. She wouldn't just be fighting with numbers. She would be fighting with lives. Alistair Finch was waiting for her in the marble and glass lobby. He looked her up and down, a proud, fatherly smile on his face. "Arthur would be so incredibly proud of you, Clara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Let's hope I can do right by him," she replied, her own voice steady. "You have the truth on your side. In my experience, that is the most powerful weapon in any room." He handed her a slim leather portfolio. "Everything is in order. You are legally and officially recognized as the majority shareholder. When you speak with the full weight of the Prescott estate." They rode the silent high-speed elevator to the 40th floor where the boardroom was located. As the doors opened, they stepped into a hushed, opulent reception area. A nervous-looking executive assistant hurried towards them. "Mr. Finch, welcome. We were expecting you." The assistant's eyes darted to Clara, a flicker of confusion in her expression. She was clearly expecting an older man, a banker or a lawyer, not this poised young woman. "The meeting is about to begin," Finch said smoothly. "We won't be late." He gestured for Clara to walk ahead. The doors to the boardroom were massive, carved from dark mahogany. Clara took one final deep breath and pushed them open. The room was exactly as she'd pictured it, a long, polished table reflecting the grey sky, outside high-backed leather chairs, and the faint, expensive scent of power. The board members were all there, seated. At the head of the table, looking impatient and imperious, was Damien Sterling. He looked up as they entered his eyes, immediately locking on Alistair Finch. A look of strained cordiality settled on his face. "Alistair, good of you to come," he said, rising from his chair. "We were just about to start. You must be the representative from the estate." His gaze then slid to Clara, standing just behind Finch. He didn't recognize her, not even a glimmer. In his mind, the context was so utterly impossible that his brain simply didn't make the connection. She was a lawyer's assistant, a junior associate. "Furniture, and this is your—" he asked, trailing off with a dismissive wave in her direction. Alistair Finch stepped to the side, a subtle, deliberate movement that left Clara standing alone in the full view of the entire board. "Mr. Sterling, members of the board," Finch began, his voice resonating with quiet authority. "I am here today only in an advisory capacity. The representative of the Prescott estate, the sole heir and majority shareholder of this company, is here to speak for herself." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle in the silent room. "Allow me to introduce you all to Ms. Clara Prescott." The name Prescott hit the room first. George Hammond's eyes widened in surprise. Evelyn Reed's perfectly composed face tightened almost imperceptibly. But Damien Sterling was still processing. He stared at Clara, a deep frown creasing his brow. The name was familiar, of course, but the face was still just a nagging, unimportant whisper in the back of his mind. He had seen her somewhere. A restaurant, a gala. It didn't matter. Clara met his gaze directly. Her heart was hammering against her ribs, but her expression was calm, her eyes like chips of ice. She let the silence stretch, forcing him to truly look at her, to see past the pantsuit, past the boardroom, back to a Tuesday night of spilled wine and shattered glass. And then she saw it. The flicker in his eyes, the dawning, horrified recognition. His mouth fell slightly open. The blood drained from his face, leaving behind a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. The CEO, the titan of industry, looked as if he had just seen a ghost. Clara gave him a small, cold smile. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice clear and steady, carrying to every corner of the room. "We've met before. You said I had a forgettable face." She pulled out the chair at the opposite end of the table, her father's chair, and sat down, placing her portfolio gently on the polished surface. "Let's begin. The boardroom was trapped in a state of suspended animation. The ticking of the large clock on the wall sounded like a hammer striking an anvil. George Hammond was staring at Clara with dawning comprehension and a glimmer of hope. Evelyn Reed's face was an unreadable mask of stone, but her fingers were clenched tightly around her pen. The other two board members looked back and forth between Clara and Damien, their expressions a mixture of confusion and fear. But all the oxygen in the room seemed to be consumed by Damien Sterling. His face had cycled through a kaleidoscope of emotions: shock, disbelief, denial, and finally, a simmering, desperate rage. He looked from Clara to Alistair Finch, and back again, as if trying to will this absurd reality away. "This is a joke," he finally choked out his voice, a hoarse whisper. "This is some kind of ridiculous, pathetic joke." He pointed a trembling finger at Clara. "She's a waitress. I saw her just a few weeks ago at the Gilded Sparrow. She spilled wine all over me." Clara met his frantic gaze without flinching. "Yes, I was a waitress, Mr. Sterling. And yes, I spilled wine on you, after your associate knocked my arm. But you weren't interested in the details, were you? You were too busy telling me to know my place." She let that hang in the air for a moment, before turning her attention to the rest of the board. "Good morning. I am Clara Prescott. For those of you who knew my father, Arthur Prescott, you know he believed this company was a family. For those of you who didn't allow me to tell you what he stood for, integrity, quality, and a fundamental respect for the people who dedicated their lives to building this enterprise." She opened her portfolio. For the past year, Mr. Sterling, as CEO, has operated under the assumption that the majority shareholder was an absentee, uninterested party. He was mistaken. Damien slammed his hand on the table, his composure finally snapping. "This is outrageous, Alistair. What is the meaning of this? You cannot be serious. The heir to the Prescott fortune is a clumsy server. The heir to the Prescott fortune," Finch stated calmly, "is the woman sitting at the end of this table. Her identity has been legally verified, and her 51% controlling interest is a matter of public record. She has every right to be here." Clara took control again, her voice cutting through the tension. "I've spent the last several weeks not just working at the Gilded Sparrow, but also reviewing the state of my company. And what I've found is deeply disturbing." She looked directly at Damien. "You're here today to present record profits, and you are to be congratulated. But at what cost?" She slid a document down the table. "Let's start with the V-Series handbag line, marketed as a pinnacle of American artisanal craftsmanship. Yet I have here supply chain invoices that show 80% of the components are sourced from a factory in Southeast Asia, with numerous labor complaints filed against it. Is that your definition of artisanal?" "Mr. Sterling," Damien sputtered, "global diversification is a standard business practice." "My father had a word for it," Clara interrupted smoothly. "Lying." She slid another document across the table. "Let's talk about the employee pension fund, restructured 6 months ago, to, and I quote from your own memo, maximize capital efficiency. The result is that this company has reduced its contribution by 60%, while our longest-serving employees will see their retirement benefits cut by nearly a third." And yet she paused, looking at Evelyn Reed. "Executive bonuses have increased by 200% in the same period." Evelyn's stony facade finally cracked. She refused to meet Clara's eyes. And then Clara's voice grew softer, laced with a dangerous edge. "There is the matter of the Arthur Prescott Legacy Fund, the scholarship and aid fund for our employees' families. You told a journalist in my hearing that the fund was thriving. But it's empty, isn't it, Mr. Sterling? Drained to cover marketing expenses, and according to this transfer authorization signed by you and Miss Reed, to pay for the lease on your new corporate jet." George Hammond let out a low groan, burying his face in his hands. Clara stood up, walking slowly along the side of the table, her presence commanding the room. "You've taken my father's name, his company, his legacy, and you've twisted it into a hollow shell, a machine for making money that has lost its soul. You talk about cutting away sentiment as if it's a weakness. You call skilled artisans cogs in a machine. You call people like me, the people who serve your food, clean your offices, and build your products, invisible." She stopped directly behind Damien Sterling's chair, forcing him to crane his neck to look up at her. "You told me I was insignificant, Mr. Sterling. But the funny thing about insignificant people is that there are a lot of us. And we see everything." She walked back to her seat at the head of the table. The power in the room had shifted so completely, it was a physical force. Damien Sterling, for the first time in his life, looked small. Therefore, Clara said, her voice ringing with finality, "As the majority shareholder of Sterling Prescott Holdings, I am exercising my authority. I am calling an immediate vote of no confidence in our current CEO." She looked at George Hammond. "George." He looked up, his eyes filled with a renewed sense of purpose. "Aye." She looked at the two wavering board members, Mr. Davies, Ms. Brown. They saw the future sitting at the head of the table, and they saw the disgraced past squirming in his chair. They nodded one after the other. Aye, aye. She didn't need to look at Evelyn Reed. Finally, she looked at Damien. "The motion carries. Damien, you are hereby removed as Chief Executive Officer, effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. Your shares are subject to the penalty clauses in your contract regarding gross mismanagement and misrepresentation of company assets. I believe you'll find that sentiment is, indeed, a liability." Damien Sterling stared at her, his face a canvas of pure impotent fury. The man who had judged her, dismissed her, and humiliated her was now undone by her. He had been so busy looking up at the sky, he never noticed the ground beneath his feet was opening up. You can't do this," he whispered. Clara leaned forward, her voice a low, clear echo of his own words from that fateful night. "Some people are born to lead, Mr. Sterling, and some people are born to pour wine. You just spent a year proving which one you are. Now it's time for you to know your place. Get out of my company." The story of Clara Prescott and Damien Sterling isn't just about a satisfying moment of revenge. It's a powerful lesson wrapped in a real-life drama. It teaches us that a person's worth is not defined by their job title, their bank account, or the clothes they wear. True power lies in character, in integrity, and in the quiet dignity with which we treat others. Damien Sterling saw a waitress and dismissed her, never imagining the strength and legacy hidden beneath the surface. He learned in the most public and humiliating way possible that the person you step on today might be the one signing your termination papers tomorrow. If this story resonated with you, if it reminded you that everyone deserves respect, and that karma has a way of finding even the most powerful people, then please help us share this message. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who needs to hear it, and most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more true stories that uncover the hidden heroes and surprising twists of everyday life. Let us know in the comments, what's the best story of workplace karma you've ever witnessed? We can't wait to read your stories. Thank you for listening.